Okay, this is a quick guide to how to handle extracts when trying to answer AS level history question 2. Okay, so just to remind you, you've been taught how to approach this question in this manner, and what we're going to be looking at for this section is the 1 and 2 sections, and this is when you're dealing with extract 1 and extract 2. Okay, we're not going to evaluate the extracts in any great detail for this video guide because it's going to be a bit of a crash course. But as you know, you've got two extracts, two interpretations from two different historians that are challenging or agreeing with the original interpretation. In this case, the original interpretation is how valid is the view that the Treaty of Versailles was the main reason for the rise of the Nazi Party by 1933. So again, feel free to pause this video and read through it in detail if you want to, but for the sake of this exercise, we're going to skim across the extract. So this is interpretation 1, written in 1965, and as you can see, it completely agrees with the original interpretation. The way I've gone through and highlighted is to showcase how clearly this historian agrees with the original interpretation. In this case, that the Treaty of Versailles was the most significant factor. But remember, in these extracts, they could disagree completely and offer a new interpretation, or they might agree to an extent. So having read this extract, this is what I'm going to conclude, and this is me doing this very quickly, is the extract completely agrees with the original interpretation and states that the Treaty of Versailles was the main factor in the fall of the Weimar. This interpretation focuses on a large external event, which if you know a little bit about your schools of history and you've done your work on different approaches, this is clearly a traditional interpretation. If you're confused by that, watch one of the other videos about schools of thought. Okay, so this is the important thing. When you approach this section, the 1 and 2 sections, there's two words that should come to mind: how and why. So how does the extract agree or disagree with the original interpretation, and why would the historian arrive at this possible view? So as a general guide, actually I shouldn't say a general guide, as a pretty precise guide on how to answer one of these sections, you're looking to comment on how the extract agrees or disagrees, refer to the extract, add your own contextual knowledge, which is a tricky bit that lots of students forget, and then in the second half you comment on why the historian may have arrived at this view, and obviously refer back to the question. How long should this section be? You're looking at 2 full paragraphs for each extract. So let's break this down a little bit and have a look. So stage 1, as I've said, the first word that should come to mind is how. How does the extract agree or disagree? So we've already scanned the extract and we know that it completely agrees. Watch how simple this is when you have a bit of an understanding of the extract. Extract 1 strongly agrees with the interpretation and outlines how the Treaty of Versailles led to the fall of democracy in Germany. Really brief, really precise, and that's stating how the historian agrees in this case. So the next part now is, I think, also fairly straightforward. You're going to use some information from the extract to make your point. Halstead, who is the name of the historian, you can write the historian if you wish. Halstead highlights how the treaty caused economic ruin and national resentment, creating a shadow over Germany that made the fall of democracy inevitable. Now, what I like about this answer is I'm not a big fan of long quotations from the extracts. I think it's a waste of ink in an exam and it takes a lot of time. What I like about this sample answer is they're taking out key phrases or terms from the extract. Halstead also highlights the November criminals' perception and once again a key quote and the stab in the back myth. Both led to anger and resentments amongst Germans desperate for someone to blame. Halstead also claims that the treaty created an environment for a extremist revival. Really, really simple, really straightforward, really, really well done. Okay, so if we rewind very quickly, we've said how the extract agrees and we've given evidence from the extract. So far, you're just dealing with the extract. The next bit is the part that students often forget. So Halstead is talking about the importance of the Treaty of Versailles. What you've got to do in this next small section is add some of your own knowledge. The Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany with harsh reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions from June 1919. Under the War Guilt Clause, Germany accepted full responsibility for the war, fueling resentment. It was forced to pay 132 billion gold marks in reparations, crippling the economy and causing the 1923 hyperinflation. The treaty stripped 13% of German land, including the Saar Basin and the Alsace-Lorraine, weakening the economy and increasing nationalist anger. Now, again, that's a fantastic example of how to use own knowledge, because yes, it is about 8 lines, so it's a fair bit of writing, but look how precise the own knowledge is there. Okay, you just got to scan it. 1923 hyperinflation, specific. 13% of land loss, specific. Naming the Tsar Basin and the Alsace-Lorraine, very, very specific. 132 billion gold marks. It's an excellent example of how you've added your own knowledge. So recap very quickly. We've stated how the extract agrees. We've used some evidence from the extract, and then we've sprinkled on some of our own knowledge. And it is really straightforward if you remember this strategy. Then we're already on to the second stage. We've explained how the historian agrees. Now we're going to explain why this historian would arrive at this view. So this is going to take us into a little bit more of a dive into the provenance or attribution of the source, or the extract, I should say, sorry. Okay. So you're going to ask questions such as, when was the extract written? This one was written around 1965. So only a couple of decades after the end of the Second World War. What was the focus of the historian? Well, this historian is clearly focusing on a big event, taking a traditional approach, looking at the Treaty of Versailles. And the sources this historian would likely use would be a lot of primary sources, because it's fairly close to the event, but also appears to be taking an approach where big events are significant. So let's have a little look. Writing in 1965, the historian was working in relatively close proximity to the events, allowing access to primary sources. The traditional approach aligns with historians of the time, which often emphasize major external factors. In this case, the focus is on the Treaty of Versailles as a decisive cause, reflecting a broader trend in mid 20th century historiography that attributed Germany's political collapse to punitive post war conditions rather than internal weaknesses. This historian does not have the advantage of the work of historians that would challenge these views in the revisionist era. So what this student is doing is explaining to the examiner, it was written in 1965, this is only a few decades after the war, there's a certain limitation on sources at this point, and this is part of the traditional school of thought, and is yet to be, it's yet to be the revisionist viewpoint that's going to challenge these ideas. Again, what you're looking to do in this section is then refer back to the question. Overall, this extract supports the original interpretation that the Treaty of Versailles was the main factor. However, it omits many other factors that should be considered when arriving at a balanced interpretation. Okay, so that is how you handle extracts in question 2.